Hitman 2-3, this is Hitman 2. What's the status? Over. 2-3, stand by. Goliath, this is 2 Bravo. Request permission to engage enemy paratroopers and attempt to snatch a grid Papa uniform 259er, 119er. Break.
Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Ben Powers coming at you for the Commander's Voice. We have a really special episode today. We're talking about a book that's going to be coming out soon called Saving My Enemy. It's about Easy Company alumni Don Malarkey and his experience with a German soldier named Fritz Engelbert. My guests today are Mr. Malarkey's daughter, Marianne McNally, her husband, Dan, Fritz's sons, Maddie and Volker Engelbert, and also author Bob Welch. So welcome, everybody. How are we doing today?
Good, thank you.
Thanks, doing fine.
So this is a really exciting project because this is a collaborative effort between the families and also with Bob. So I'm going to ask an open-ended question, and anybody who would like to kind of kick things off, just feel free to jump in. But what were the origins of the project? What was the story and the connection between Don and Fritz?
Marianne, you should go.
So the connection is that my dad and Fritz had met in Europe, not during the war, but years after the war in the early 2000s, and basically struck up a relationship that was, as we like to call it, it's almost like it was a butterfly. It was short-lived, but it was beautiful while it lasted. And the two of them basically saved each other because they each were looking for forgiveness. They were each looking for a friend who understood their pain that they were going through, and they found each other at the perfect time and ended up forgiving each other and having their lives end in a much more beautiful way than they had expected.
And the context was that they had fought within 5 miles of each other during the Battle of the Bulge, and yet all these years later, what was the 60-year anniversary, right, of the Battle of the Bulge when they met. And the cool thing about the story is the legacy. These folks right here, that the families of Don and Fritz have become so close. They are almost like they are a family. And to me, as an author, that's what floated my boat once I understood the story. I was a little bit hesitant at first, but Marianne convinced me that this is a great story, and I was ashamed that I didn't realize that sooner.
No, that's really very interesting in terms of realizing that there was a story there. I imagine most readers want to focus on the actual, wartime experiences. There's obviously a tremendous amount of interest in World War II with the recent 75th, 76th anniversaries of D-Day, the 75th anniversary of the end of the war, and things like that. And not many people want to focus on the aftermath. I mean, when you focus on 1939, 1945, that's such a very small period in a veteran's life and in a man or woman's life. But then they've got to deal with the consequences of that throughout the rest of their time with us. So this is either for, Matt and Volker, or for you, Marianne, before your dads met, were they having challenges dealing with what they had done as soldiers, or was it just something that was never mentioned? It was as though it had happened to a different person.
Our father had problems since I can remember. We have always, in special moments, he saw a film, he read some news, and he always got in this feeling, and he was sad, and sometimes he had to cry or so. And that was every year. The Germans have a special day in the year, what we call Volkstrauertag. It's
maybe like your Veterans Day, also in November.
And that was a day. It's in November. It's a dark month, and so every time he was very down, and so
and all through the year, on certain occasions, like when he saw, like you said, a documentation about the war, he got in that mood again. He was so really obsessed with. He really didn't get over it for 60 years. He's been, but he was of that kind. He talked about it very, very often. Others dad's generation, they didn't talk at all. But our dad, he talked, in our opinion, he talked too much. It was too much, and we couldn't help him. He spoiled and he ruined many of our family parties, like when Volker's eldest daughter was confirmation. So we are Protestant. When you're 14, you have a confirmation of your belief, and that's supposed to be a very solemn moment and a very formal party with family members. And our dad began to hold a speech.
Yeah, it was a good party where people were laughing and joking, and we all had fun. And then he held his speech.
And after he came to that sentence, now you are, my dear Julia, you are 14. When I was 14, and then he got into, he remembered, he couldn't help but start crying. And
he said, when I was 14, the war in 39, the war started.
The war started,
so
and then he was gone. He couldn't stop, and that was just one episode of many. So he really struggled a lot.
And he was at the end of his speech, the tears were dripping, and I watched the other people sitting around, people who didn't know him so well, and after that, somebody asked me, what has he done? Had he been a guard in a concentration camp or so? Why is he so still after those years crying when he's talking? But he wasn't, he wasn't at all. But he had the shame of being involved in the whole.
Yeah, and it was always with the feeling of sadness and guilt. He just could not forgive himself for having been in Hitler's army. And in the beginning, he said he wanted to become a soldier and wanted to fight for the German Reich, and he was proud to become a soldier. At the end, that turned, and he came to his senses, probably at the time when he was a prisoner of war. And
maybe when he heard about all the crimes that happened, the Jews that were killed, and then he began to think about what he had done, or not he personally, but he had helped to make the war longer also, and with every day they fought, and that was a guilt he couldn't forgive himself.
That sounds like a very, very traumatic experience, living that. So, Marianne, was your experience similar to what Manny and Volker went through, or was your dad more reticent? How was your experience growing up with a combat veteran for a father?
My dad seemed to handle his issues, I guess you would say, with using alcohol. That's how he seemed to be able to deal with it. I'm the youngest of 4 kids, and my older siblings are, they had more of a different upbringing than I did. Different in that my dad was a little bit more focused on work and providing for the family. And not that he wasn't, excuse me, with me, but I think with me, because it was only me, there's a little less pressure. And so he had a little bit more time to think. And I think that's got the best of him. He would end up, basically drinking his sadness away and dealing with it. And when I was able to go to the world premiere party in France for Band of Brothers, my dad was doing an interview with the BBC, and he talked about, in that interview, my mom and my sister and I were standing behind him, and we were on the Normandy beach and doing this interview. And he said, "Oh, I tried to drink the war away," and I remembered this small little sentence, and I looked at my mom and said, "Now my childhood makes complete sense. I had no idea what he was dealing with. Even I knew he fought the war. I had been going to the Easy Company reunions. I knew about all of that. I just didn't realize internally how much he was struggling." And so that part, then it made more sense. And then I could appreciate what he was going through.
Oh, understood. So you're in this open-ended question for everyone. Your dad's met in 2004, 60th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Did they just happen upon each other? I realize that as time goes on, these commemorative events become, larger and larger, but were they together at a formal event? Did they just overhear each other talking and realize they had fought within 5 miles of each other? Like, how did they suddenly realize, hey, you're somebody I need to talk to?
Maybe I start from the German side. So our dad, I think from our side, it started, we gave our dad a PC, a computer in Christmas 2000, I think. And he started getting used to Google, was before Google, but he wrote emails and he got in touch with people. And one of the people he got in touch with, but it was all about war and Battle of the Bulge, because that was his baptism of fire. That was really that which was all about for him. And so he got in touch with a Dutch author who did some research about the Battle of the Bulge. And this guy, Hans Weyers, he had our dad's email address. So our dad was on that list, on the list of Hans Weyers, whenever he had many contacts to the American side. And so one day in 2004, when the 60th anniversary got closer, this Dutch journalist, he sent an email to our dad and asked him if he was willing to be part of an interview which was done in Belgium, and it was held in Bastogne. That was in May 2004. And so we, Volker and I, we just thought, wow, that's such a great occasion and opportunity for him to tell his story, and because we couldn't hear it anymore. So we went with him and we promised, you won't go alone, we will go with you. So that's when it started, and he all of a sudden he felt, wow, he got in touch with a lady from the village that he had attacked. Her house was set on fire, and so that was the first moment he said to himself and also to us, oh, maybe they don't see me. They
will not forgive me because
that was his.
They don't want to see me. They will not forgive me. We set their whole village on fire, and he was not sure what will happen.
Right, and he was surprised that he was accepted as a human being. And then with this experience in December, then again, our dad got an email request, and this Hans Weyer said, there are American veterans will come to Germany, and they are asking if there are any German veterans that would like to see them. And maybe now Marianne can take over. And we convinced our dad it would be a good idea to say, let's go there. We will go with you, but please do so.
At first, it was not so easy to convince him. And,
it was not easy.
It was the same. They said, they don't want to see me. I will end me, and so. But if he went, and Marianne can.
Well, I wasn't at the event. So Matthias was there. I was not there. Excuse me. But my dad was very excited to meet the German soldiers that ended up being there. I think who was it that ended up being there? Your dad and
one other guy from Lindemann.
From another Volksgrenadier division.
It was just the two.
Right. Go ahead.
No.
Oh, I thought you were going to say something. Sorry. Anyway, so from my understanding of the meeting, they immediately hit it off, just as if they were long lost friends that ended up reconnecting or something. And they ended up being I don't know how to say it, but just drawn to each other. They felt connected to each other. It ended up being, you know, if you saw Fritz, you saw my dad, and vice versa. And they ended up starting this friendship right after this, and Matthias and I ended up being the link to their communications, because neither could speak the other's language.
Oh, wow.
So we had to get through this language barrier. But my dad would write a letter on a yellow legal size notepad with a Sharpie. That was a given. That's how he always did everything. And he would write it out. He would hand it to me, and he knew a little bit about computers, enough that he knew about email. And he would give me the paper, and he'd say, send this, do that email thing, and send this over to Fritz's son. I need to get a letter to him. And sometimes he would write an actual letter, but once he learned that he could get an instant response by sending it over, Matthias would write back, and I could print it and give it to my dad. And then he was hooked. It was like they ended up having this little pen pal relationship. And so anyway, that was from their first meeting. And there's way more, sorry, I'm getting teary. There was way more intimate moments during that visit that we talk about in the book. That is the time when I don't know, I think that was the time when they had the most time by themselves to really talk, and Matthias was their interpreter, going back and forth and explaining their thoughts to each other.
Oh, yes, ma'am. I'm getting a little teary too, to be honest. This is a beautiful story. So now that you've brought this up into, 2004 and beyond, we got to the point where the book is. So Bob, I'd love to bring you into the conversation. I kind of appreciate your patience while we're setting everything up. How did you get involved when you determined that, okay, Marianne's convinced you that there is a story here? What was your, your thought process, and where'd you take it?
A little bit of context. I met Don back in 2007 because I had the privilege of writing his memoir, Easy Company Soldier. So I had known him for about a decade. The book came out in 2008, and then I got an email from Marianne in January of 2019 saying, I think there might be another story here, that about Dad and this German soldier Fritz becoming friends late in life. And at the time, I kind of poo-pooed it. I had a lot on my plate, and I just thought, man, it sounds like a great long feature story for a magazine, but I don't know if there's a book there. But when I met with Dan and Marianne, midway through the conversation, I said, you know what, this is something. This could work. And the deeper I got into it, the more I realized this was an incredible story. There's just not many war stories that have happy endings, and this one did. And I think part of the thing that was incredible about that night that they first met was how fearful Fritz was. I mean, you have to understand, this guy was totally ashamed of what he had done in the war for Hitler. And suddenly there's these band of brother heroes, these movie stars, as he kind of referred to them as, who were coming from America to Germany, and they were all going to be there celebrating their 60-year anniversary of them beating the Germans, and they wanted Fritz to come. I mean, so you can understand why he was hesitant to show up. And his worst fear was that he would be humiliated, and that is exactly what happened that first night in the pub. Right. One of the 6 American soldiers basically says, it's a good thing that you're meeting me now, because if you'd met me 60 years ago, I would have killed you. And that's the first thing that happens to Fritz. He's ready to leave. Matthias is ready to leave. But then Don stands up, raises his beer mug, and welcomes Fritz into the band of brothers. That was the key moment. That changed everything. And the next day at the cemetery, they're like kids on a field trip. They hung out together, signed autographs, met these school children. And then that evening, alone back at the hotel with Matthias doing the interpreting, that's when they broke down. That's when they told each other stories, how guilty they have felt, how much pain they've each have been in for the last 60 years. And they both forgave each other as the snow was falling outside on the 60-year anniversary of D-Day.
Wow. I mean,
Amazing.
Hollywood couldn't write a better script. Seriously, that is.
Well, we're waiting for that.
So, quick question for Matthias and Volker, and I don't mean to belabor the point, but as you indicated, Fritz knew that these guys were famous. There'd been the mini series; they were the Band of Brothers. But as a former German soldier, did Fritz have any trepidation about meeting these guys specifically because they were 101st? Kind of the rock stars of the ETO, not just average American soldiers, but like real bad dudes.
I think not before he first met them.
We hadn't heard about the Band of Brothers maybe a month before the first meeting then in Bastogne.
Yeah.
So I got the CD pack just a week before we went to Bastogne.
Yeah.
And I think maybe I saw 1 or 2 episodes, but so we knew they are in a mini series, let's say in a movie.
Yeah.
But Fritz was surprised, or we all realized in Bastogne that they were heroes.
Yeah.
Everybody in Belgium, in Bastogne, knew them.
Yeah.
And they were 6, Wild Bill and Babe and Earl McClung, Shifty Powers, Buck Compton, and then Don.
Yeah.
They were really like
Like-
king and queen
like
visiting,
film stars, yeah.
and Fritz, we all were just, we couldn't believe it. And when we went into a pub, they didn't have to pay. So they wanted to pay for a beer or so, but everybody
takes money.
they felt so honored to have them as their guests in their pub. So that we hadn't known that before, and maybe if Fritz had known that before, he might have been a little even more shy. But
I think that it's interesting how different the two men were. Fritz, Don was this, you could argue that Don is one of the most famous soldiers in the history of time. You could argue that with the Band of Brothers, what it did. Fritz was totally obscure. Don served more days on the front line than anybody in the 506, in Easy Company, excuse me.
Yeah.
Fritz never killed anybody. They were totally different. And after, Don was conservative, Fritz was liberal. They couldn't have been more different. And that's the power of the story too, is that despite how different they were, despite how their goal originally was to kill each other, they wound up saving each other's lives.
Oh, and Marianne, I'd like to kind of bounce in the same vein of the conversation. After the book came out, the original one, Band of Brothers, followed by the miniseries, followed by your dad's own book with Bob. Did that kind of affect how your dad perceived himself? Not in terms of like, did he get a big ego? That's not what I'm driving at. But in terms of he was trying to drink the war away beforehand, but after the fact, did that help him put it into context and maybe relieve some of that guilt even before he got a chance to meet Fritz?
Oh, definitely. That really helped him start dealing with what was going on in his head. He could get it out and he could talk about it. I think probably the most healing part was writing Easy Company Soldier with Bob. Bob would come up from Eugene to Salem where we lived, and he would sit with my dad and talk. And I wouldn't be there, every time they would meet, but I would be there from time to time and listen. And my dad just talking about getting out everything in his head, then basically saying, here, Bob, here are my thoughts, take it and run with it. And I think it definitely made a difference. Once Band of Brothers, the miniseries came out, he started doing these talks. So he would talk at schools, mostly at high schools for history classes, and even there talking with the kids and hearing their questions, it really helped to was very therapeutic for him to get it out and talk about it and not realize that it was bad. You know, it was something that he didn't like to talk about. Obviously, he didn't like to talk about what it's like to take another human's life. That was almost too much for him to bear to talk about. So for him,
in some ways, he was an anomaly to his generation, to other soldiers. I think that Don was rare in how willing he was to really talk about the real gut level essence of war. But I think that also is what started to help him heal him. When we use the metaphor of little birds on the ocean swells, how when big waves came, you can either try to outswim it, or you can just go roll with it, or you can turn and dive right into the wave. And Don finally chose to dive into the wave. And he started to go into the reunions for the first time. And he did the book with Band of Brothers, or with me. And then he engaged audiences with the story. And that is a tremendous strength of him. And I think that Fritz, in the same way, had that same strength. It was latent. It was down deep inside. But Don helped bring that out in Fritz to face it.
Yeah, I think for most of Don's life, it was very much an evolution. I met Don when I was 14 years old, and at that point, he was just starting to go to reunions, and I think he had tried to ignore the war to that point. And the reunions, I think, started to help, but really they got together and they, you know, told funny stories and they drank and they just had a good time. It wasn't any deep discussions of what happened during the war. And then as he, you know, kind of fast forward up to Band of Brothers and speaking engagements and meeting Bob, I started to see a shift in him to how he looked at the war and how deeply he looked into the war and those events. And a lot of that culminated for me when shortly after Irene passed, his wife, in 2006, and he came to my family's Christmas party, which Christmas is always tough because that's when they were in the Battle of the Bulge, and they were surrounded in freezing weather and a very bleak situation. And he kind of broke down that night talking about how much he appreciated our family being there for him, but just you could just see everything come out. And then and that was kind of, I don't want to say that was a valley necessarily, but it was a turning point that couple of years. And he started to reflect more, which was a struggle for him. But I think he started to be able to deal with it on a certain level. And I think that ultimately culminated with his relationship with Fritz. And as he, in his last couple of years, he started to come to terms with what had happened and how he ended up there and the purpose of that. And it was a really interesting thing to see for me over a 40-year period of time.
I think what they both realized was, what they both told each other was, it wasn't your fault. You only did what your country told you to do. And I think that was the healing salve that they realized, they didn't really have a choice. Your country throws a gun in your hand and says, go do this, and you do it. And that was the healing moment because both of them said the same thing to one another.
So just a quick question. I apologize, but so you've obviously been involved with the family for a long time, then since your Easy Company Soldier came out in 2008. Did you have to do a lot of additional research in order to get this book ready, or did you kind of already have a lot of good background material?
The other people on this screen are the ones that did the heavy lifting. They had so much information that this was one of my easier books to research and write. To be honest, I'd like to say that I did a lot, but the reality was that Fritz or Volker and Matthias in Germany and Marianne and Dan, they provided so much information for me. Yeah, I did some contextual research and reached out to some other people, but for the most part, I mean, they provided photos, they provided letters, and that's the thing that makes this so amazing. It would be fascinating as a novel, as fiction, but it's true. And so I can't take much credit for most of the research.
Okay,
Bob,
fantastic.
you did a great.
Yes, you want to jump in?
Let's say about the individual part for Fritz in Germany, but what happened in Germany. What was it like to grow up in Germany with the Hitler Jugend? That you have so many references to books that was even new to us, and I think it's perfect to have a scene with Fritz and his parents, and then Bob includes scenes or sentences from a book about Hitler Jugend, about the whole propaganda system, and to put it in context. And I think that is just perfect to have both sides, because Fritz also he was just a boy and he couldn't wait to become a Hitler Jugend, a Hitler boy, and he didn't know anything else. And Bob, you found you did the research to.
We covered Bob with mails, and we covered him really, and
yeah, right.
But he is the right guy to pick the pearls out of it. And
I think that I traded about 550 emails between the two German brothers and me, and so that was just so awesome. Whenever I had a question, at the end of the night, every evening, I would write all these questions, and when I woke up in the morning, the answers would be there. So. You know, the internet was a huge help on all this, but these guys were amazingly helpful. They had letters that their father had written during the war that are amazing. I mean, here's a letter that was written, you know, right before the Americans were supposedly going to surrender Bastogne. And here's a letter from a German soldier that he wrote to his mom and dad that evening. It gave a realism to the story that we otherwise wouldn't have had. Now, Don's story, Don, I'd already built a foundation with him. So there was a lot less to do with the Malarkey side of things. But getting to know Fritz, getting to know a whole nother culture, getting to know what it was like to grow up, knowing that you were just going to be part of Hitler Youth, while Don is back in Astoria, Oregon, fishing, floating the river, catching salmon, learning to smoke. I mean, he had this idealistic, ideal childhood, whereas Fritz really didn't have a childhood. He was a man at age 13. Go fight, and that's what he wanted to do.
I think that's going to be a very interesting part of the book for readers. I know it was for me to hear so much about the German side, not just what happened during the war, but leading up to it. You get some interesting pieces about what the German, the mindset of the German people was at the time, and then hearing about Hitler Youth. You hear it referenced in movies and things like that, but this was the first time that I've really gotten that deeply into it, and I think it's going to be a very interesting part of the book. It was for me. So.
The whole concept just sounds fascinating because memoirs are obviously quite popular, but to have both sides so intimately connected and portrayed with the support of both families, that this is something unique in my limited experience, at least. So when is the book coming out?
I think it's April of 2021. Yeah. And I think the most interesting part of the book, frankly, is once the war is over. I mean, some people always ask me, because I've written half a dozen war-related books, do you like to write about war? Do you love? No, I don't. I like to write about inspirational people, of which Don and Fritz are qualified. But I think what happened after the war, I think we take readers into a world that, particularly for World War II, a lot of us haven't gone there. A lot of us, Vietnam was the war where PTSD, that's where the term came from. That's when we started realizing what war could do to human beings. But the World War II was, you got back and you went to work and you got your house in the suburbs and you forgot about the war. Well, not so much. So I think this takes readers into the depths of PTSD, of guilt, of shame. It just doesn't go away as simply as we would like to believe. And yet Don and Fritz have this happy ending, and then the happy ending has a happy ending because not only do they forgive each other and I guess we could just say it, die in peace, but their families become this legacy that says, you know what, no matter how much we are different than somebody else and we have divisions, we can find ways to find commonalities, we can find friendship. And with what's going on in our country today, I don't think there's ever been a time where we need a book like this more, because we have never been more polarized. There's a lot of hate going on right now, and Don and Fritz teach us that you can overcome that hate.
That's a fantastic lesson, and I think that's great. I'm coming up on the end of time, so is there any points we haven't addressed? I've got one more question for Marianne, but I'm going to sit on it for a second. Are there any points we haven't addressed yet that anybody would love to bring out? Because this has been fascinating.
Because what's most important for us is, Matthias and me, is that what Bob said, that we are now in another generation. Yeah, our fathers started it, and now we carry it on, and it's getting intense, more deeper and deeper for me. And we now are members of the Easy Company family. Then somebody must imagine this: two German guys with their wives coming over to the USA 3 times, and Tracy Compton, the daughter of Buck Compton, said to us, "Welcome to the family." It's more than we could ever expect. And that is
you have to understand what happens here. Marianne invites them to come to an Easy Company reunion.
And I don't tell anybody.
The sons of German soldiers. And so the people at this reunion are all the children and the nephews and nieces of these guys. And she had no idea how people would react to this. And yet Matthias and Volker were accepted. And again, it's just another thing. If you let people get to know each other, guess what? They can find commonalities, they can find friendship, they can find love. And that's, I mean, there's just so much courage that went on here. And what you did, Marianne, is courageous. And what Fritz did in the first place was courageous, to show up at that pub.
No, it's absolutely fabulous. So my final question, Marianne, and I apologize, but this is my inner fanboy, can't let this go. How good a job did Scott Grimes do portraying your dad?
He did a great job. When I was at the world premiere party in 2001, we got to watch all of episode 1, all of episode 2, and then we watched bits and pieces of all the rest all together. They had built a movie theater basically at the top of the beach of Utah Beach. It was amazing. And so we watch it, and we go to leave, and I looked at my mom and I said, was Dad really like that as a kid? I mean, was he really that much of a jokester and kind of that goofy? And she said, oh, Scott nailed his personality. That was exactly what he was like. And it's such a gift to be able to see somebody portray your father as a young man, because we didn't know him like that at all. So to be able to have that, to be able to have the book that Bob wrote and have all these stories in one place that we can continue to hand down to our children and grandchildren and nieces, nephews, all of that. It's such an amazing gift. I can't even think of what else to call it, because it's just not something that every family gets. And I appreciate it very much.
That's awesome. And that's a fantastic note to go out on. So everybody, the book is called Saving My Enemy. It's the story of Don Malarkey and Fritz Engelbert and the friendship they formed after World War II. It's going to be available in the spring of 2021. I believe it's available for pre-order now on Amazon. And I just want to thank everybody who was on today. So Matthias, Volker, Bob, Marianne, Dan, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been an outstanding and very well spent hour.
Thank
you.
Enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
All right, y'all. You have a great day.
Okay.